Biloxi, Mississippi. A quiet southern town with a burning core of corruption. In 1987, its secret burst violently to the surface, leaving 2 prominent citizens dead and ripping the top off a grand conspiracy.
On Mississippi's Gulf Coast, a judge and his politician wife are murdered in their home. The killer left few clues. It looked like a professional hit, and the investigation led nowhere. But the FBI refused to give up. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Until we could prove that federal laws had been broken, our hands were tied. It would take years to break the conspiracy of silence and reveal the tangled tale of corruption.
Biloxi, Mississippi. Monday, September 14th, 1987. It was a typically warm summer night in this quiet Gulf Coast town. The workday was over, and most residents had retreated to the tranquility of their homes. Like most of their neighbors, State Circuit Court Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were unwinding after a long day. Vincent Sherry was a prominent judge in Biloxi. Margaret was making plans to run for mayor. Both were fixtures at Biloxi's social and community functions. They were a happy couple who had raised 3 grown children. Tomorrow they planned to visit their daughter out of state. Their life together seemed ideal. They were just settling in for the night when an unexpected visitor came to the door.
What are you doing here with that? Can you look out?
And brought their perfect world to an end. The Sherrys were supposed to be with their daughter, so no one realized anything was wrong until 2 days later when the judge failed to show up in court on Wednesday, September 16th. Calls to the Sherrys' home went unanswered.
I'm sorry we can't take your call, but leave your message after the beep.
His colleagues at the court phoned Pete Halat, Vincent Sherry's friend and former law partner.
Morning, Pete Halat.
But he hadn't seen or heard from the judge either.
Well, he's supposed to be in court.
When did he leave?
I don't know.
All right, I'll send
No,
somebody
wait,
else.
you let me call him at home and I'll figure out where he is.
All right.
After he left a concerned message on the Sherry's answering machine, Halat felt he'd better check on his friend personally.
Oh, I got the machine. Judge, it's Pete. They're looking for you in court. Is everything okay?
On his way out, he asked his junior partner, Charles Legier, to ride with him.
Charlie, hold on, time to saddle up. And I need some help, so let's go.
Listen, I'll give you a call back, okay? Yeah, bye-bye.
I figure if we go together, the two of us.
As they drove, Legier tried to make conversation.
Finding out from lawyers.
Halat seemed distant, perhaps concerned about the judge. Both of the Sherry's cars stood in the driveway.
Well, the car's here.
I don't like it. Well, his car's here. He's supposed to be in court.
Halat asked Legier to go to the house, while he asked a neighbor if she'd seen the couple.
Just go ahead.
Legier rang the doorbell, but no one answered. He saw that the last 2 morning newspapers hadn't been picked up.
Pete Halat. I'm partners with...
The neighbor told Halat she hadn't seen the Sherrys for a couple of days, which she thought was odd since both of their cars were in the driveway. When Legier tried the Sherry's door, he found it unlocked. Something wasn't right.
Hey, Pete! Pete!
That's unusual.
Yeah, I was just knocking on it and the door opened up.
Halat, concerned by the open door, cautiously stepped inside. A few steps in, he made the gruesome discovery. Judge Sherry had been gunned down in his own home.
Hey, what's wrong?
They called the police. Authorities arrived to find the body of Vincent Sherry at the front of the house. In the back bedroom, they discovered Margaret. Because the couple was so prominent, the murder investigation became top priority. Detectives contacted the FBI's Biloxi field office. Though the FBI would not yet be officially involved, they offered the use of their agents and forensic laboratory. Inside, the police began scouring the crime scene for clues. They conducted blood spatter analysis to determine projectile angles. If they could figure out where the murderer had stood when he fired the shots, they might be able to reconstruct the crime.
Okay.
Inspector Robert Burris, a crime technician with the Biloxi Police Department, helped process the scene. He discovered a possible clue in the den.
There was blood trailing from his feet, actually going down between his legs a little ways, back to where he was laying. There was blood spatter on a double sliding glass door that was right beyond his head. And further examination in this room, I found some small pieces of foam rubber.
Burris didn't see where the foam rubber could have come from.
3 shell casings. Want to get those?
A search of the house led him to one conclusion.
Now, this foam rubber had to have been brought into the house. We examined every piece of material in this house, in every room of the house, all pillows, mattresses, everything else. There's no foam rubber tore up in this house. It was brought into the house. It does have gunshot residue on it. And basically about the only way it can get there is for a bullet to be fired through it.
For Burris, the significance of the foam rubber was obvious. The killer had used a homemade silencer. Investigators dusted for fingerprints, but found none of any value. They found 9 spent .22 caliber shell casings from a semi-automatic pistol, as well as the bullets used to murder the Sherrys. The position of the shells indicated that the shots had been fired in rapid succession. But most striking was how well the killer had covered his tracks. Nothing at the scene pointed to the killer's identity. He did his job well, and his mission was clear.
The lack of evidence in this house, such as items stolen, a struggle occurring, the absence of forced entry, no ransacking going on in the house whatsoever. A person came there for one thing, that was to kill the two Sherrys.
Special Agent Keith Bell from the Biloxi FBI field office agreed that this was a professional job. The Sherrys had been assassinated.
The crime scene appeared to be very limited as far as evidence remaining, which meant it was well planned, well executed, and professionally done. A small caliber weapon had been used. The foam rubber indicated that perhaps a silencer had also been used, and the Sherrys had been shot in the head, so it seemed to be a very professional job.
A multi-agency task force was assembled with Special Agent Keith Bell among its members. Investigators would spend days processing the crime scene. They grappled with a single question: why had the Sherrys been murdered?
That was one of the main questions, that being why were both Judge Sherry and Margaret Sherry murdered? Because it was fairly obvious that Judge Sherry could have been killed during his morning or afternoon jogs around the neighborhood. So it was a real mystery why Margaret had been killed.
Investigators believed the answer might lie in the controversy over Biloxi's future. Some civic leaders hoped to transform the sleepy southern town on Mississippi's Gulf Coast into a flashy resort where casinos would attract tourist dollars. But with strip clubs already established in town, Margaret Sherry felt Biloxi's small-town charms were threatened. And the casinos would attract a criminal element. As a candidate for mayor, she had made powerful political enemies by trying to keep gambling out. Agent Bell wondered if Margaret was killed to silence her protests.
Margaret had been so outspoken politically in the community. She was known to be anti-gambling. And if elected mayor in 1989, she had planned to close down the remaining strip clubs in Biloxi. So there was always the possibility that she might have been the target, rather than Judge Sherry.
The task force would investigate Margaret's political enemies, but first, they'd question the Sherrys' friends and neighbors. Someone in the neighborhood must have seen something. But even people who'd known the Sherrys for years were reluctant to talk, fearing the specter of Biloxi's emerging criminal underworld.
The Sherry murders brought a dark cloud over the city of Biloxi. Many of the citizens in Biloxi were afraid to openly express their opinions. They saw that Margaret Sherry, who had been quite vocal and quite outspoken in political circles, had ended up dead, as had her prominent husband, Judge Sherry. So many citizens after these murders were hesitant even to be interviewed by FBI agents or by local police officers because they basically did not want their names tied into anything to do with this case.
If people wouldn't talk to the authorities, perhaps they would talk to Lynn Sposito, the Sherry's daughter. After being notified of her parents' murders, Lynn rushed to Biloxi from her home in North Carolina. Determined to find justice, she questioned everyone in the neighborhood. One family friend gave her a crucial piece of information. He described a suspicious car and driver in the neighborhood on the night of the murders. She took the lead to the police.
They identified a man who had seen a suspicious Ford Fairmont driving in front of the Sherry home on Monday night, September 14th, 1987.
Investigators tried to determine the identity of the driver based on the witness's description. Their search came up empty. But a few days later, not far from the Sherry's home, investigators found an abandoned car, a Ford Fairmont. A check on the vehicle's identification number showed it had been reported stolen the day before the murders. Police also learned that the tags on the car were not registered to the car. Realizing that this vehicle was probably the killer's getaway car, investigators towed it to a police garage to examine it further. Somewhere in the car, they hoped to find a key to the killer's identity. Less than a week after the brutal murders of Biloxi couple Vince and Margaret Sherry, investigators received their first promising lead. They recovered an abandoned car, matching the one witnesses described seeing the night of the murders. After contacting Agent Keith Bell about the discovery, investigators processed the car for clues. Inspector Robert Burris found something peculiar.
I was processing this vehicle, and one of the things I noted, the dome light had been dismantled and the bulb taken out of it. In other words, if you open the door, you ain't got no light. Both of the sun visors were in the down position. Whether you're riding around daytime or nighttime, you ain't gonna be able to see the people's face in it very well.
Investigators believed more than ever that this was the car used by the Sherry's killer. Anything found inside it was labeled, packaged, and shipped to the FBI labs in Washington, D.C. But FBI lab examiners would find nothing of evidentiary value. After Agent Bell arrived, he examined the license tag more closely. He discovered it had its own story to tell.
It was determined that the tag on the Ford Fairmont had been stolen from an abandoned vehicle in 1984, actually 3 years before these murders occurred. So what it meant was someone had removed the license plate, likely in 1984, had kept the license plate, and then when this major crime in the city of Biloxi was to occur, they pulled it off the shelf, so to speak.
With no other solid evidence, investigators hoped that following the trail of the stolen tag might lead to the killer. It was traced to an apartment complex where the original car had been abandoned 3 years earlier. Investigators contacted the apartment manager, who told them that prior to having the vehicle towed, he called a friend to come and strip it for parts. The manager's friend was a man that agents knew by name and reputation. Biloxi locksmith Lenny Sweatman. He was the last person to be seen near the car. Sweatman belonged to a loosely organized group of criminals the FBI was investigating in connection with another case. The group was known as the Dixie Mafia. FBI agent Keith Bell had connected the car used in the Sherry killings to Lenny Sweatman. Now, Bell wondered if the Dixie Mafia was linked to the Sherry murders. If Sweatman had a part in it, Bell believed that other Dixie Mafia members couldn't be far behind. He began looking into Sweatman's associates.
What that meant to us immediately, those of us familiar with the criminal associations on the coast, was that if Lenny Sweatman was involved in getting the tag for the hit car, then quite likely his close personal friend and longtime associate Mike Gillich, the strip club owner in Biloxi, might also be involved in these murders.
That's all right. Sometimes you know how it is. Thanks.
Have a beer.
All right.
Gillich, who owned 3 strip clubs in Biloxi, was well known to local law enforcement. He was currently under investigation by the FBI in connection with a Dixie Mafia operation known as the Lonely Heart Scam.
See, he gets to him.
But Special Agent Bell needed a thread that connected the two investigations together. He started by familiarizing himself with the Lonely Heart scam. It was run out of Angola prison in Louisiana by a man named Kirksey Nix, the incarcerated kingpin of the Dixie Mafia.
No, the first model.
Nix would run ads in gay magazines, asking for money to help fictional gay men get out of trouble with the law. Through the scam, Nix was hoping to generate enough money to solve his own legal problems. He was serving a life sentence for murder.
From his jail cell at Angola, he coordinated what we've been referring to as the homosexual scam, which generated hundreds of thousands of dollars from individuals around the country, as well as some people in Canada. With this money, he intended to buy his way out, or attempt to buy his way out, of his Louisiana prison sentence.
Believing that they were helping gay men out of trouble, people who read the magazine ads would wire or mail money to a nearby Western Union. Nix would then call his contact on the outside, Mike Gillich. Gillich would then dispatch his bagman to retrieve the money.
Right. See you later.
Gillich made sure that the scam money was distributed to Dixie Mafia members and safely stashed away for Kirksey Nix.
Take care.
In the coming months, investigators developed more evidence in the Lonely Heart scam, but still had no direct link between these conspirators and the Sherry's killers. A year into the investigation, the murder case threatened to stall.
Hi.
Come in.
As the year stretched to 16 months, the Sherry's daughter, Lynn Sposito, grew increasingly frustrated.
You said on the phone that you've been looking.
In January 1989, she hired a private investigator to rev up the inquest into her parents' murder.
He said he could make out the man.
And I'll give him a call, and I'll be on this case this afternoon.
The family had wanted very much to have a quick resolution to the case, but by early 1989, there'd still been no arrest. And of course, at this point, the FBI had not formally entered the case.
Nice to see you. Thank you for seeing
The lack of official FBI involvement hampered Bell's investigation.
Lynn Bozito's hired me.
So when the private investigator paid him a visit, Bell welcomed his assistants, hoping they could share information. The two were old acquaintances from the private investigator's days in law enforcement. Since Agent Bell was unable to act officially, the private investigator would pursue a lead that looked promising. He would interview another Angola inmate. The private investigator and Bell hoped the inmate at Angola could finally link the Lonely Heart scam and the Sherry murders.
He met with all the right people, and because of his knowledge of the Dixie Mafia and from what he had learned from law enforcement authorities on the coast, he did go over to Angola and did talk to the right person over there.
The inmate's name was Bobby Joe Fabian. He was another known member of the Dixie Mafia, doing time for kidnapping and shooting a state trooper. Fabian claimed he had not been involved in the Sherry murders, but he had learned that fellow inmate Kirksey Nix had been. Fabian told the private investigator that Nix had had Judge Sherry killed because Sherry had allegedly stolen money from Nix's Lonely Heart scam. That wasn't all. He said Nix had been told of the theft by none other than Pete Halat, Sherry's former law partner. Halat, the man who had delivered the eulogy at the Sherry's funeral, was now implicated in their murders. Halat officially represented Nix on legal matters, but Fabian said Halat's role in the Lonely Heart scam was criminal, not legal. Halat was one of the people receiving money from Nix for safekeeping through Mike Gillich's bagman.
Don't forget to pick up next week at the other place.
And the ties between the outlaw and the lawyer went deep. Kirksey Nix's girlfriend and accomplice, LaRae Sharp, worked in Halat's office.
Where's he from?
Fabian said both LaRae Sharp and Pete Halat were stashing money from the scam in a safe deposit box for Kirksey Nix. And he said the amount had reached 6 figures. Thanks to Fabian, the link between the murders and the Lonely Heart scam had been made. And not only had Fabian given investigators a possible motive for the killings, he was also able to supply the name of the alleged hitman, an ex-con named John Ransom, who was believed to be living in Georgia. But tracking down Ransom would take time.
Anytime law enforcement people get together and start talking about notorious Dixie Mafia members, John Ransom comes up quite early in the conversation. He's a longtime alleged hitman for the Dixie Mafia.
In August of 1989, 2 years after the Sherry murders, Agent Bell now had enough evidence to warrant a full FBI investigation into the killings. Accompanied by the Sherry's daughter, Lynn Sposito, he approached the United States Attorney and the FBI with a demand to officially open the case.
So with the tying in of the scam to the murders, we knew we had some federal violations involved. We have wire fraud, we had mail fraud, and we perhaps had a hitman traveling from Georgia to Mississippi to kill the Sherrys. It was decided to open an official FBI investigation and join with local authorities in the investigation.
By now, however, suspect Pete Halat, Judge Sherry's former law partner, had been elected mayor of Biloxi. With a key suspect in such a high position, investigators encountered new roadblocks.
It became very difficult for the FBI to share all of its information with the local authorities. We are not saying that the local police were corrupt. What we are saying is that Mayor Halat put his own people in as Director of Public Safety and as Police Chief, so we were somewhat circumspect on what we shared with local authorities during that time period.
In August of 1989, as investigators attempted to unravel the truth about the Sherry's murders, informant Bobby Joe Fabian made a surprise move. He told his story about the Sherry murders to the TV news. Fabian hoped that by bringing attention to himself, Kirksey Nix would be less likely to have him killed for cooperating with authorities. Along with the report, the station broadcast a mugshot of John Ransom, the alleged hitman in the Sherry case. When Charles Legier, Pete Halat's junior partner, saw the photo, it surprised him. He recalled seeing Ransom outside the Sherry Halat law offices a few weeks before the murders. Legier shared his information with the task force. Major Randy Cook of the Harrison County Sheriff's Department took Legier's statement.
Legier said the reason he remembered Ransom was Ransom stepped off of a curb and came up to him and asked him, "Where's Vince Sherry's office at?" When Legier was interviewed, he recalled there was something unusual about the way Ransom stepped off of the curb. Ransom had a prosthesis on one leg.
Investigators learned that Ransom was now in a Georgia prison, serving time for another murder. When questioned about the Sherry murders, he refused to cooperate. As Cook further questioned Legier about the day he and Halat had found the bodies, an important detail emerged. Legier remembered that Halat had walked into the Sherry's living room, seen Judge Sherry's body, and said, "Vince and Margaret are dead." Cook relayed this to Agent Bell.
What was interesting was that Margaret's body was in the far back bedroom of the residence, and according to Chuck Legier, Pete Halat did not have time other than to briefly enter the front of the house and would have no way of knowing that Margaret's body was also in the very back bedroom.
In October of 1989, 2 years after the murders, Agent Bell knew Halat was involved, but he still lacked enough evidence for an arrest. Even so, he felt it was time to confront Mayor Halat. It would be a quiet warning, man to man.
And I let Mayor Halat know that I thought his knowledge of the Sherry murders was much greater than what he had shared with law enforcement authorities up to that point. And I recall also telling him that the FBI would continue working on this case until it was totally solved. My recollection is he smiled and did not have much else to say.
As a lawyer, Halat knew Bell would need more concrete evidence in order to secure a conviction. What he likely didn't realize was the depth of Bell's commitment to bring him to justice. Three years had passed since Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret were murdered in their Biloxi, Mississippi home. FBI Special Agent Keith Bell had connected the killings to members of the Dixie Mafia and to Judge Sherry's friend and one-time law partner, Pete Halat. The alleged triggerman, John Ransom, was refusing to talk. In January of 1990, Agent Bell and Major Randy Cook of the Harrison County Sheriff's Department drove to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary to question another possible accomplice.
This is Special Agent.
A man named Bill Rhodes. Rhodes, a known associate of John Ransom, was willing to cooperate. He told them that in early 1987, Ransom had contacted him about driving the getaway car in a crime to take place in southern Mississippi. Ransom had said a judge would be murdered and that the pay was $10,000.
There were certain promises made to Rhodes by Ransom that I know certain people in Biloxi that if you'll help me on this and you'll have the run of Biloxi anytime you want it.
So in March of 1987, Rhodes went to Biloxi and met with Ransom and a man named Pete. It was Pete who specifically asked Rhodes and Ransom to do the hit. Rhodes said he also met with Mike Gillich, the Biloxi strip club owner, who would supply the money once the hit was done. But 5 months later, before they could do the job, Rhodes was arrested on an unrelated bank robbery charge, and Ransom got cold feet, afraid Rhodes would turn on him. The information helped the case inch forward, but Agent Bell and Officer Cook still felt that Ransom held the missing pieces. Another year would pass without much progress. In late 1990, the investigators went to the Bostick Correctional Institute in Georgia, where Ransom was serving time. Finally, Ransom agreed to talk. He admitted that he delivered a .22 caliber pistol to Lorraine Sharp, Kirksey Nix's girlfriend. But Ransom insisted that he did not do the job. Based on what Ransom said, Lorraine's involvement was starting to look bigger than simply stashing scam money in a safe deposit box.
All finished?
Finished, thank you.
Through his contact with Sharp, Nix learned that the investigation was heating up He worried that his girlfriend might talk, so he tried to head off the problem by putting out a contract on her life. But in late 1990, Agent Bell arrested her for her participation in the murders, inadvertently saving her from Nix's gunman. During a polygraph test, Sharp denied her involvement in the Lonely Heart scam and the Sherry murders. But the machine called her bluff. When Bell and his team added her statements to their existing stacks of evidence, they were ready to bring indictments against several key players. Mike Gillich, John Ransom, LaRae Sharp, and Kirksey Nix were charged as conspirators in the Sherry murders. Notably missing from the list was Pete Halat. The case against Halat would have to wait until they had enough evidence for a murder conviction. For now, the FBI would look to convict the others on conspiracy to commit murder.
So many of the questions came up, why didn't y'all indict Pete Halat early on when you indicted everybody else? Well, at the time, we didn't have the hard evidence that you would have to arrest a mayor and prosecute him.
The conspiracy trial produced several key witnesses that would help investigators piece together the complex scheme.
Mr. Gant, you stated that all these people here were
Robbie Gant, Gillich's bagman for the Lonely Heart scam, testified for the prosecution. His testimony helped prosecutors link the Sherry murders to the scam. All 4 defendants were found guilty. Nix was given 15 years in addition to the life sentence he was already serving for murder. Gillich also received a 15-year prison term. Ransom got 10 years, and LaRae Sharp 1.
I pay you for it. Get your hands on order in the court.
With these conspirators behind bars and the Lonely Heart scam no longer operational, Bell moved on to his next objective.
We decided not to end the Sherry investigation after the 1991 initial convictions because at that time we had not proven who had actually shot the Sherrys, and also Pete Halat had not been indicted or convicted at that point. And we all felt strongly that Pete Halat had played a major role in the scam and in the murder plot. So we were determined to continue the investigation to see if we could get enough evidence to indict and convict Mr. Halat and the actual shooter.
In late July of 1992, Agent Bell got the break he was looking for. Following the conspiracy trial, Mike Gillich was desperate to find a way out of prison. He contacted one of his associates in Biloxi and asked him to approach Robbie Gant with an offer. Gant told Agent Bell about it.
And the associate had offered Robbie Gant $20,000 if Gant would recant his testimony against Gillich and sign a false affidavit stating that he had been threatened by me to testify against Gillich, to testify falsely against Gillich.
Gant agreed to wear a wire and get the offer from Gillich's accomplice on tape. Gant met with him in Mississippi. This time, Gant's tape was rolling when Gillich's associate reiterated the bribe. Gant accepted as Bell had instructed. Now, Bell had the evidence he needed to turn up the heat on Gillich. Just the man who could tell the story from the inside. By 1993, 6 years after the double murder of Vince and Margaret Sherry, FBI agent Keith Bell had put 4 members of the Dixie Mafia behind bars. But he still had no formal murder convictions against those involved. And Mayor Pete Halat, the suspected mastermind of the case, was still free and running the city of Biloxi. In fact, the year before, Mayor Halat had broken ground on the city's first big casino.
The victory for our town and our people. There you go.
The press still hounded Halat about his involvement in the Sherry murders, but he remained adamant about his innocence. Bell continued to work his plan. He used the bribe Robert Gant had recorded on tape to level another charge against Mike Gillich, already in jail. Now Bell indicted Gillich for witness bribery and witness tampering for trying to buy off Gant. And that did the trick.
No doubt the most important turning point was in October of 1993 when Mike Gillich finally decided to cooperate and tell the story of this whole case from an insider's point of view. And that's what really allowed us to bring final resolution to this investigation.
After the years of painstaking work Bell had spent on the case, it was a satisfying moment. Finally, it seemed his patience and ingenuity were paying off. Gillich was in no hurry to accrue more jail time. Bell's relentless pressure had persuaded him to cut a deal before the bribery trial even began. The Dixie Mafia member would tell what he knew about the murders. Maybe now, Bell could get the convictions he knew were long overdue. But for a career criminal like Mike Gillich, adjusting to life on the right side of the law wasn't easy. At first, he tried to bluff his way out.
Of course, it always takes some time, a period of weeks, to develop some degree of trust and to be able to communicate with someone like this who, for the first time, has decided to leave his lifelong role as a criminal and start cooperating with the FBI.
When deception didn't work, Gillich had no alternative. He had to tell the truth. Now, for the first time, Bell heard the story from an inside source. Gillich knew all the details.
Mike was the center point. Mike knew Kirksey Nix. Mike knew Pete Halat for years. And in fact, when Kirksey Nix was looking for an attorney over in the coast area to represent him on various matters, Mike Gillich introduced Nix into Pete Halat.
He confirmed that Pete Halat was indeed behind the plan to murder the Sherrys, and that the plot grew directly out of the Lonely Heart scam of Angola prison inmate Kirksey Nix. Some months before the Sherrys' deaths, Halat had closed the safe deposit box he and Nix's girlfriend LaRae Sharp had access to, effectively cutting off her access to the money. He then transferred the money into a box only he and Judge Sherry could use. Motivated by greed, he stole $100,000 cash from there. As Nix's trusted accomplice, Halat could blame the theft on Judge Sherry. Next, he went to Mike Gillich with news of the theft.
Mr. Gillich stated that Pete Halat approached Mr. Gillich himself in late 1986 and told Mr. Gillich that much of the money was missing, supposedly around $100,000. and Mr. Halat blamed Judge Sherry for taking the money. Mr. Halat knew that Kirksey Nix would be very furious about this.
It is not known who ordered Margaret's death, but as a fierce opponent of corruption, she posed a threat to the underworld forces hoping to control Biloxi. With Margaret dead, Halat could be free to run the town. Gillett said that he and Halat planned the murders. Ransom and Rhodes provided the murder weapon. But when they passed on doing the hit, Gillett found a replacement. A Texas-based petty criminal named Thomas Holcomb. Holcomb would be paid $20,000 to murder Judge Sherry and his wife. Gillett had also helped provide the car, with the help of locksmith Lenny Sweatman.
Stay away from me! I didn't do it!
In October of 1996, agents arrested hitman Thomas Holcomb in Texas on murder charges. That same month also saw the arrest that Agent Bell had anticipated and worked 9 years to achieve.
An innocent man, and you're gonna put the cuffs on me?
Let me read you your rights.
The arrest of Pete Halat for the murders of the Sherrys.
You can, anything you say can and will be held against you.
Kirksey Nix and LaRae Sharp were indicted on 52 counts, including fraud, money laundering, and murder. Halat was tried and convicted in the summer of 1997, a full decade after the crimes were committed. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Also tried and convicted were Kirksey Nix and Thomas Holcomb, the hitman. Both were sentenced to life. LaRae Sharp, Nix's girlfriend, got 5 years.
I think a lot of citizens in Biloxi now realize that there are a lot of dedicated professional law enforcement people who will do everything they can to protect the community and work hard to solve major crimes. Perhaps the legacy, you might say, of the case for the criminal element is that they realize after seeing this case that they can commit a crime one day and think they're getting away with it a year later, but it could come back 10 years later and get them.
While the Sherry's killers were finally brought to justice, Margaret Sherry's dream of a Biloxi free of gambling was never realized. Instead, Biloxi has become a resort town filled with casinos and neon lights. The sleepy southern town is gone forever, along with the woman who lost her life trying to save it.
In 1989, a female Marine captain disappeared from her quarters without a trace. Known for her exemplary conduct, her colleagues found it hard to believe that she'd gone AWOL. Military authorities suspected she'd fallen victim to foul play. The FBI joined the investigation. They would find the decorated officer or bring her assailant to justice.
Shirley Russell was a determined woman, determined enough to reach the rank of captain in the United States Marine Corps. When this decorated officer turned up missing, her colleagues refused to believe she'd gone AWOL. It was unclear whether Captain Shirley Russell was dead or alive. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When a crime is committed on a military installation, it falls under federal jurisdiction. Agents would have to rely on their dedication and instinct to solve the mystery of her disappearance.
The Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia, is located 35 miles south of Washington, D.C. Since 1917, it has been headquarters to one of the nation's most selective branches of the military. Over 3,000 Marines train, work, and live on the 100-square-mile base. Nearly everything in civilian life is mirrored on base, from department stores to housing. Married officers have the option of living on base in married officers' quarters, which are known as MOQs. For 6 months, MOQ number 394D was the home of Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell and her husband, Robert Russell. By January 1989, Captain Russell decided to end the marriage. For the next month, she would stay with a friend off base until bachelor's housing was available.
I will. Well, tell me what I gotta do.
Shirley packed her civilian clothes, her uniforms, and her Marine-issue firearm. Robert begged her to stay, but Shirley was determined. For her, the move was final. For Robert, the separation meant he had to move off base. As a former Marine, he would be losing his last tie to the Corps. Captain Russell continued to advance in her career as the adjutant to the commanding officer of the support battalion at the Marine Basic School. She was in charge of all personnel matters and administrative needs of the support battalion. She was known as a dedicated Marine by her peers and by her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Hodges.
When I first met Shirley Russell, I was very impressed with the fact that she was a black female captain, because we just don't have that many in the Marine Corps, and that she had come from a poor background and was making something of herself, and she seemed so energized and so eager to keep moving up the rank structure.
Captain Russell?
While assigned together, they built a friendship based on mutual respect.
I can't talk to you right now. Now is not a good time.
Hodges knew that Shirley's marriage was in trouble.
I'll have to talk to you later.
My relationship with Shirley Russell was very special, even though that I was her commanding officer and her ultimate boss, if you will. I was very close to her as sort of a big brother mentor. And we talked sometimes, after working hours about her situation, her marriage, her past, and so forth.
Thank you, sir.
On Thursday, March 2nd, about a month after her split with Robert, Shirley requested leave from work. She needed to clean her former quarters and finalize her legal separation. 4 days later, on Monday, March 6th, Hodges arrived at the office expecting to find Shirley at her desk. He was surprised to find her office empty. Shirley had a perfect work record. She had never been late to report.
And when I walked in the door, I asked Major Buck Bourgeois right away, and I said, "Where's Shirley?" And he said, "Sir, she's not here." And instantly, I felt like, oh no, something has happened to her.
Lieutenant Colonel Hodges investigated the unauthorized absence. Captain Russell had recently moved into bachelor officers' quarters on base. Hodges hoped he would find her at home.
Captain Russell. Captain Russell. Open the door, Corporal, please, sir.
As the missing captain's commanding officer, Hodges had authorization to search the room.
Captain Russell.
There was no sign of her, and no indication she had moved out.
Lock up, Corporal. Yes, sir.
The Marines returned to the office and contacted the captain's husband, who now lived off base. Hodges knew that Robert Russell had helped Shirley clean and paint their vacated quarters over the weekend. They arranged to meet at the couple's former MOQ. The Marine officers inspected the residence. Russell told them that he and Shirley had met here around noon on Saturday to do some touch-up painting.
Sorry.
No, and I know something.
According to Russell, Shirley volunteered to buy some paint from the base exchange at about 1:30. He claimed that she didn't take her car, but walked to the PX instead. Russell said he hadn't seen her since.
She went to get more paint.
Lieutenant Colonel Hodges didn't believe Robert Russell's story.
It hit me as just totally a lie because the PX was probably 4 or 5 miles away. And there's no way in the world that she would have walked to the PX from their quarters.
Outside the quarters, the officers also inspected Russell's storage shed. On the floor, Colonel Hodges noticed a rust-colored stain. Russell dismissed it as paint. Hodges was skeptical. He was no expert, but to him, it looked like blood. Lieutenant Colonel Hodges briefed the Naval Investigative Service. The NIS reported the possibility of a crime to the FBI's Washington field office. The NIS briefed special agents on the case. Captain Russell had been missing for 3 days. With no indication of her whereabouts, the agents followed standard procedure. Special Agent Alan Malinchak headed the case.
When you have somebody missing, you either have a case of an abduction, you have a case of a missing person, somebody who's walked away for whatever reason, or you have foul play. So the initial investigation that the FBI was involved in ran all 3 of those investigative lines.
Mr. Russell?
According to standard procedure, the missing woman's husband, Robert Russell, was the first to be questioned.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
He told agents that he was talking with a neighbor around 1:30 the afternoon of Shirley's disappearance, when a friend of hers stopped by to pick her up for lunch. At 3:30, Robert said he called her bachelor officer's quarters to see if she had gone home. The duty clerk had not seen Captain Russell, so Robert left a message. Around 4 p.m., Robert borrowed his housemate's car and drove to Pennsylvania to spend the weekend with his parents.
Did you feel personally threatened by this, or did your wife?
During the first interview that I had with Robert Russell, he was very calm, very businesslike, wanted to assist the FBI in the investigation, and provided me with multiple locations of where Shirley might be, who she may be associated with, what could have happened.
Midnight phone calls.
Russell thought it was possible someone had abducted or harmed her. Though Shirley had no enemies, the couple had experienced some trouble due to their interracial marriage. Russell told agents he and his wife frequently visited his hometown near Mahanoy City, Pennsylvania. One afternoon, while shopping, the Russells were harassed by racists. According to her husband, Shirley had been frightened. But another incident scared her even more. An unidentified man had called their house on base.
Hello?
The caller used racial epithets and threatened to harm the couple.
How'd you get my number?
Whoever the caller was knew where the Russells lived. After the threatening phone calls, Robert told officials he felt Shirley might need protection for the times he couldn't be with her. At a pawn shop near base, Robert picked out a .25 caliber Raven semi-automatic just 2 days before Shirley disappeared. Russell told agents he surprised Shirley with a gift on the day they met to clean their former quarters.
I want you to be safe.
According to Russell, Shirley was appreciative of the pearl-handled weapon.
Thank you.
Agents were suspicious of the story. As a Marine captain, Shirley already had a personal sidearm. If she felt unsafe, why would she need another gun? With Shirley and the gun nowhere to be found, that question would be difficult to answer. Marine Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell had vanished from base housing on March 4th, 1989. Her husband was the last person to have seen her. Agents needed to corroborate his story. The FBI interviewed Marine Captain Patrice Gale. According to Robert Russell, on the day Shirley disappeared, Captain Gale had arrived at Shirley's former residence to pick her up for lunch at about 1:30. Gale confirmed this. Robert also told her that Shirley had gone for paint and hadn't returned. Captain Gale thought this was odd.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Shirley never missed appointments. And this one had been especially important. Just a day earlier, Gale had accompanied Shirley to the base legal office to pick up her separation papers. Shirley planned to present them to Robert the day they painted their former quarters. This would make their separation official, and Shirley worried about Robert's reaction. Afterwards, she would need a friend to talk to and ask Captain Gale to meet her. When Shirley failed to show up, Captain Gale worried that Robert had done something to her friend. FBI agents checked Shirley's bachelor officer's quarters. The clerk had not seen her since Saturday, March 4th, the day she disappeared. On that same Saturday, Corporal Dan Caraway confirmed that Robert Russell had called, looking for his wife. The corporal noted the time in his logbook as 3:30 p.m. About a half hour after he took the message, Caraway thought he saw Captain Russell. She was talking on the telephone. He recalled that she was wearing jeans and a maroon sweater. He wanted to give her the message that her husband had called, but he was distracted. By the time Caraway was free, the woman he thought was Captain Shirley Russell was gone. His description contradicted Robert Russell's statement that Shirley had been wearing a blue jogging outfit. The corporal also only saw the woman from behind. He never got a good look at her face. Agents doubted if she ever returned to her apartment. They found no trace that Shirley had changed her clothes or brought back the separation papers. Investigators questioned Russell's old neighbors. One of them said she saw a blue station wagon backed up to the Russell shed on the day Shirley had disappeared. She noted the time was 5 p.m. This was an hour later than Russell claimed he left for Pennsylvania. Investigators wondered if Robert Russell was mistaken or lying. Agent Alan Malinchek called the FBI in Pennsylvania to pin down Russell's whereabouts the rest of that day. Special Agent Michael Quirk of the Allentown office became co-case agent. He contacted Robert's parents.
Robert Russell had traveled to St. Clair, Pennsylvania on March 4th, 1989, and he stayed with his family the weekend of March 4th, March 5th.
FBI interviews with Russell's family confirmed he had arrived alone. None of them had seen Shirley. The FBI launched a media campaign seeking the public's help. Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell's photo was featured in television and newspaper stories. Leads began to pour in. Midway between Quantico and Robert Russell's hometown, a clerk in York, Pennsylvania, called federal authorities. The clerk reported that a young black woman had been in the store on the afternoon of Saturday, March 4th, the day Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell disappeared from Quantico. According to the clerk, the woman bought several items and paid with a check. The clerk asked the woman for identification. She produced a military ID card. She resembled photos the clerk had seen in the newspaper.
Do you mind if I look at your bank receipts?
The agent asked to see the checks received on that day.
Do you mind if I've seen the receipts? Sure.
He found that none of them were written by Shirley Gibbs Russell. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lawrence Leiser worked with the FBI on the case. He noted another detail that suggested the woman in the store was not Captain Russell.
The color of the ID and the location of the picture in the ID described as belonging to Shirley Russell was the ID of a dependent military person, not of an active duty military person.
There had been no activity since March 4th in Captain Russell's bank or credit card accounts, nor had she called her family or friends. Considering Shirley's stable character, her disappearance didn't make sense to Agent Alan Malinchek.
She was the type of person who was going to do very well in the Marine Corps. She would be promoted. She had that capability. She was sharp. She was squared away. She easy to make friends. Everybody that worked with her liked her. She had a lot of stability in her life with regard to church and family. For her to just disappear of her own accord just didn't make any logical sense.
With no word from her or a kidnapper, agents believed it was likely that Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell was dead. They were now searching for her body. Dozens of Marines fanned out across the huge base. They searched hundreds of acres of dense woods the Marines used for training. They found no trace of the missing captain. Perhaps Robert Russell knew more about his wife's disappearance than he was telling the FBI. Agents asked him to submit to a polygraph examination. He agreed.
That the last time you saw her, you were painting your quarters, and it was sometime prior to 3 p.m. on Saturday, March 4th?
That's correct.
As before, agents found him to be cool and cooperative. For almost 3 hours, Robert Russell answered dozens of questions relating to Shirley's whereabouts.
Mr. Russell, could you advise me where you...
He was subjected to 3 separate exams.
Was this red spot paint, Mr. Russell?
Yes, it was.
Each time, Robert Russell was found to be deceptive. When agents told him the results, Russell seemed unfazed, almost smug. He even consented to be fingerprinted. Perhaps he was aware that polygraphs were inadmissible in a federal court of law. Without a body, agents would need something stronger than a hunch to prove that Russell had killed his wife and disposed of her. In the spring of 1989, the FBI continued to hunt for the body of Marine Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell. In their search for answers, agents delved deeper into the background of their prime suspect, her husband, Robert Russell. Special Agent Michael Quirk learned that Russell was already married before he met Shirley. He had 2 children with his first wife, Pam. The marriage only lasted 6 years. In 1986, Russell told his wife that he wanted a divorce. He left Pam and their children on Christmas Day. 6 months later, Robert married Shirley while they were both stationed at Parris Island, South Carolina. The FBI learned that Shirley was transferred to Quantico a short time later. They also learned that Robert told friends that the distance was hurting his marriage. He claimed he was leaving the Marine Corps to join Shirley in Quantico in order to stabilize their relationship. But agents discovered a different motive for the move. Agents believed it was unlikely Robert would voluntarily relinquish his rank as captain. Being in the Marine Corps was Robert's whole life and whole world. Military records showed that in February of 1988, while stationed at Gulfport, Mississippi, Robert's superiors found that his passion for the Corps did not seem to apply to its regulations. They issued Robert a less than honorable discharge for dereliction of duty and defrauding the government. He was escorted out of his office and was prohibited from taking anything with him except his own clothing. Although Robert was no longer a Marine, he moved into officers' quarters at Quantico based on Shirley's rank of captain. While Shirley supported him, Robert tried to get his life back on track by becoming a teacher at a nearby high school. But his drinking started to become excessive. He was getting drunk more often and staying out later.
Robert?
Shirley was distraught. She joined Al-Anon, a support group for the loved ones of alcoholics. When Robert became physically abusive, Shirley finally left him.
Don't touch me.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Lawrence Leiser believed that Robert's problems left Shirley few alternatives.
She realized the marriage was going nowhere, began to get counseling from a local counseling center that was made available to members of the Marine Corps. She also consulted with a Navy lawyer to begin the divorce process.
To investigators, Russell's instability and abusive behavior reinforced their belief that he was capable of killing Shirley.
His personality could not tolerate the fact that this black woman, his wife, was a Marine Corps captain who was successful, who was succeeding in her career, and to top it all off, wanted to divorce him.
Agents learned that during her separation, Shirley had sought refuge off base with her close friend, fellow Marine Captain Ann Mack. Captain Mack told Agent Malinchek that Shirley was afraid of her husband. She intended to leave him, but needed a place to stay.
She had asked Captain Ann Mack if she could stay with her at her townhome in the Springfield, Virginia area, and Captain Ann Mack agreed and laid out some ground rules about Bob Russell not being there, not coming into the house, nothing like that whatsoever.
But it was not enough to keep Robert away from Shirley. Mack was worried about her. Mack told investigators that Robert was stalking Shirley. On several occasions, he showed up at the house early in the morning as Shirley was leaving. He harassed his wife until she agreed to spend some time with him. Mack said that Robert Russell was living off base. He had moved in with one of his new colleagues. An FBI agent checked the address. It was the home of Sandy Flint. Sandy Flint offered little. She said she knew nothing about Robert's missing wife. On the way out, the agent met Robert Flint, Sandy's father-in-law. He was a retired painter who had worked at the base at Quantico for 10 years. Mr. Flint told the agent about a conversation he had with Robert Russell 2 days after Shirley's disappearance.
Robert Russell had asked them how to clean up stains from concrete floors. And the father-in-law had told Bob Russell that you could just use chlorine or soap and water, and that would pretty much clean it up or dilute it. And Bob had asked him, well, what if it's blood? And the father-in-law had said, well, you could use muriatic acid.
Mr. Flint told the agent something else of interest. Sandy and her husband had recently separated. He suspected Sandy was now having an affair with Robert Russell. With each new person agents interviewed, they found more deception from Robert Russell. If Sandy was indeed involved with Russell, she might know if he had killed Shirley. Agents would inform her it would be unwise to obstruct a federal murder case. Sandy agreed to speak with the FBI. This time, agents found her to be far more cooperative. She described her role in Robert Russell's obsession.
She had admitted to having an intimate affair with Bob Russell while Bob Russell was still married. She advised us that she, at Bob's request, she had surveilled Shirley Russell. She could report to Bob Shirley's activities and whereabouts.
He enlisted her as his spy. Sandy told the FBI Russell was convinced that Shirley was having an affair. He wanted to know where Shirley went and who she met. Sandy followed her everywhere, but found nothing to support his delusional fixation.
And he was so compulsive, he wanted to catch his wife cheating. Of course, the irony of all of this is she wasn't cheating at all. It was he who was cheating on her.
Robert was too far gone for logic. He refused to believe the assurances of his mistress. In his own mind, if he was cheating, so was Shirley. And he would go to any length to prove it. He told Sandy that he broke into his wife's car and planted a voice-activated recorder. When it failed to record anything incriminating, he decided he needed to get closer. Robert broke into Ann Mack's house to bug Shirley's bedroom. What happened next told Sandy that her lover's obsession had completely consumed him. Robert called his mistress from his wife's bedroom, speaking in a whisper.
You won't believe where I'm at.
He told Sandy he was drinking Shirley's wine and reading her journal. Then he said something she would never forget.
He had informed her that if Shirley comes missing, it'll be me. I'll have taken care of her. And she had said, we can't do that. They're going to look for her. He says, and if anybody questions you on this, deny it. Don't even admit to the conversation we're having now.
Sandy's statements were incriminating, but it was her word against his. To corroborate her story, the FBI needed physical evidence.
We requested a consent search of Captain Ann Mack's residence and retrieved several items, and some of those items, one was a telephone and one was a wine glass. And when we sent those to the FBI laboratory for analysis, we were able to develop Robert Russell's fingerprints on those items.
The FBI now had its first piece of physical evidence to corroborate that Robert Russell obsessively stalked his wife. But without Shirley's body, it was still not enough to charge him with murder. In March of 1989, there was little evidence to link Robert Russell to the murder of his wife, Marine Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell. Early in the investigation, agents learned the suspect had been having an affair with Sandy Flint. Flint now told the FBI more about the day Shirley Gibbs Russell disappeared. She said Robert Russell had borrowed her car, a blue station wagon, to drive to his parents' house in Pennsylvania. She remembered he left her house sometime after 4 p.m. Sandy thought this was strange because he could have used his own pickup truck. Assistant U.S. Attorney Lawrence Leiser believed Russell borrowed her car that day to transport Shirley's body to Pennsylvania.
The reason he asked to use that car was because he had an open bed pickup truck. The body was still in the storage shed, and he had to dispose of the body. And he couldn't do it in an open bed pickup truck, so he borrowed the closed station wagon of his girlfriend to dispose of the body.
Agents hoped to substantiate this theory. They returned to Russell's former residence, where his neighbor had seen the same blue station wagon backed up to his shed. Investigators needed to take a closer look at the floor, where Lieutenant Colonel Hodges had seen the rust-colored stain. But the stain was gone, at least on the surface.
And as they were chiseling the whitewashed pieces of the concrete up, Bob Russell had asked them what's going on, and they had told him that they're taking these samples to determine what the substance is on the concrete. And Mr. Russell had voluntarily told them, well, I had cleaned that up with some muriatic acid.
The FBI lab confirmed that muriatic acid was present on the concrete. The same substance that Mr. Flint had suggested Russell use to remove blood from cement. Technicians found no trace of blood or paint on the chips. What could have been a key piece of forensic evidence had been destroyed. Agents hoped Sandy Flint's car would reveal more. FBI examiners scoured the station wagon inside and out. It was unusually clean for an older car that had so recently made a round trip from Virginia to Pennsylvania. It turned out to be another dead end. As the investigation stalled in Virginia, Robert Russell split up with Sandy, packed his things, and moved to Pennsylvania to start a new life. The FBI's investigative focus turned north as well. Agents followed Robert's every move. They observed that while he relied on his parents for support, he was very close to his brothers, Mike and Ron. Agents approached the brothers on several occasions. Mike Russell agreed to meet with agents. He told them that the day after Robert arrived in Pennsylvania following Shirley's disappearance, Robert took Sandy Flint's station wagon to a nearby car wash. Robert and his brother thoroughly cleaned the inside of the car, vacuuming it and spraying it with deodorizer. Agents believed Robert's actions demonstrated his intent to remove any evidence that Shirley's body had been in the car. Mike Russell told agents he never saw a body. He did concede that his brother's behavior had seemed desperate since Shirley left him. 2 months before she disappeared, Mike and his older brother Ron drove to Virginia to take away Robert's guns. Agent Quirk recalled that his brothers felt this was necessary to prevent Robert from hurting someone.
He was depressed in the fact that he was no longer in the Marine Corps, that he loved the Marine Corps. He didn't have money. He was a captain in the Marine Corps. Now he's a special education teacher. Shirley had removed him from her checking account, so he was having problems financially.
Circumstantial evidence was mounting, but the FBI lacked one crucial piece of evidence for their case: Shirley Gibbs Russell's body. The first question was where to look. Agents learned the answer from Robert Russell's first wife, Pam. Robert's boyhood home was in Schuylkill County, a rural, mountainous region in northeastern Pennsylvania. Thousands of coal mines, mostly abandoned, are scattered throughout the rugged county. Some are hundreds of feet deep and partially filled with water. As a young man, suspect Robert Russell had spent much of his time hiking and hunting in the region. His family said he knew the place like the back of his hand. A search conducted in this terrain would be daunting, but nobody ever questioned whether it should be done. 150 people participated in the extensive ground search for Shirley Gibbs Russell in early May. Volunteers from the FBI, the Marines, the Naval Investigative Service, and the Pennsylvania State Police participated. None of them were more eager to find the missing Marine than her own peers from the United States Marine Corps. 9 helicopters and 6 transport trucks filled with Marines were deployed. Over 3 days, they searched 2,000 acres of land. They never found Captain Russell's body. Agents would soon develop a theory as to why the search was not more fruitful. Agent Quirk learned about a strange phone call Ron Russell received from his brother Robert.
Robert had asked Ron if he could get him some dynamite. And Robert had stated that he couldn't get dynamite at Quantico because it was too expensive. And Ron had asked Robert, why do you want dynamite? And Robert's response was, I want to blow up Shirley.
Ron never bought it, but agents now wondered whether Robert Russell had thrown Shirley's body into a mine shaft, then sealed her grave with an explosion. The search did yield one surprising result. An agent found what appeared to be the grip of a gun handle. It was sent to the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit at the FBI's lab in Washington, D.C. for analysis. By comparing the samples to hundreds of other guns, examiners determined that it was consistent with the grip of a .25 caliber Raven semi-automatic. It was the same type of gun Robert Russell had purchased from a pawn shop on March 2nd, 2 days before his wife disappeared. Unfortunately, the tantalizing discovery would not help with the prosecution. agents never found Robert's fingerprints on the gun part. To prosecutors, it looked as if the ex-Marine had covered his tracks well. Without a murder weapon or a body, it would be next to impossible to convict Robert Russell of murder.
Very clear.
After an investigation spanning 2 months, 2 states, and thousands of man-hours, the FBI was no closer to arresting their prime suspect, Robert Russell, for the murder of his wife, Marine Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell. Though agents had gathered a significant amount of circumstantial evidence, Assistant U.S. Attorney Lawrence Leiser didn't have enough physical evidence to prosecute Russell for the crime.
We didn't have a body, we didn't have eyewitnesses, we didn't have weapon, and it just took a tremendous amount of investigative skill and effort to put the pieces together, to go out and search out the leads, tremendous amount of hours and energy that these FBI agents took to gather the evidence.
Authorities didn't even have enough evidence to make an arrest. Agents were frustrated, as were the hundreds of Marines whose lives had been touched by Captain Shirley Russell.
It was like the loss of a child or a dear friend, and there was nothing you could do about it. And what frustrated me so much was she was so close to being extricated from her bad marriage. And for her to be killed, it still bothers me to this day. I mean, it's just one of those things that you just never really totally get over.
It looked as if Robert Russell was going to get away with murder. But Russell's past indiscretions would come back to haunt him.
We had been contacted by the Naval Investigative Service at Gulfport, Mississippi, that there was some evidence in a locker there that they had maintained from when Bob was discharged from the Marine Corps. And so they sent it to us, and it turned out to be a floppy disk.
It had been confiscated when Russell was relieved of duty in Mississippi, a year before Shirley Russell disappeared. For security reasons, no service member who has been relieved of duty is allowed to go through their documents after dismissal. One of Russell's former superiors found the disk and read its menu of contents.
One of those items that he saw on the menu was the word murder. And he pushed the mouse for that, on that word murder, and up came 26 steps, very detailed and elaborate steps on how Robert Peter Russell was planning the murder of Captain Shirley Gibbs.
Russell's plan clearly documented his intentions.
The 26 steps was a very revealing piece of evidence because it showed the man's state of mind, his willingness to even contemplate murdering another human being, let alone his wife. Step 1 is leave Thursday, January 18th for Paris Island. Well, who was at Paris Island? Shirley Russell. Make it look as if she left. Well, that's exactly what he tried to do when he did murder his wife. And then the last thing he says is blame it on her own kind. Obviously referring to her race. This is a man who clearly had the mental wherewithal and intent and motivation to do this kind of act.
On February 8, 1991, the computer file convinced federal prosecutors to bring charges against Robert Peter Russell for the murder of his wife, Captain Shirley Gibbs Russell. Ironically, Russell was arrested in a prison.
Need you to step with us?
He had recently taken a job as a substance abuse counselor at Pennsylvania's Graterford State Correctional Institution. But prosecution would not be easy.
Let's go make some notes here.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Lawrence Leiser would have to assemble all the pieces of circumstantial evidence like a mosaic. Hopefully, the jury would see the portrait of a killer emerge.
Let's see what we got here.
Assistant U.S. Attorney and co-prosecutor Michael Rich would help to prepare the case against Russell.
It was clear that we were going to have to make it on, circumstantial evidence. A lot of that circumstantial evidence was as a result of what Bobby Russell had been saying and doing since his wife's disappearance in 1989. So the plan was to assemble all that into some sort of coherent scheme and present that.
Never before had the federal government attempted to try someone for first-degree murder based solely on circumstantial evidence. At trial, the prosecution asserted that Robert Russell intended to commit murder when he bought the .25 caliber Raven semi-automatic on March 2nd.
Sweet, how much?
Several of his co-workers reported that he had told them a .25 caliber is a perfect weapon. It leaves little evidence behind. He said there's virtually no blood spatter, and the bullet usually lodges in the body. On Saturday, March 4th, when Shirley gave him the separation papers, he refused to sign. Just after noon that day, the prosecution believed Robert Russell snuck up on Shirley in the shed. He had to wait for nightfall before he could remove the body. To establish an alibi, he talked with a neighbor and lied to Shirley's friend about his wife walking to the base exchange to buy paint.
Okay, that's probably a good idea. See.
Around 4 p.m., he went to Sandy Flint's house and borrowed her station wagon. After night fell, he wrapped Shirley's body in a tarp and placed it in the back of the car. Their neighbors saw it backed up to the shed. He then drove 4 hours to St. Clair, Pennsylvania with the body in the back of the car. Once there, he knew exactly where to go. There were hundreds of abandoned mines to choose from. Then, Robert Russell, who had once sworn to uphold honor as a member of the Marine Corps, dumped his wife's body into a mine shaft. He threw dynamite in to bury the evidence under thousands of pounds of rock. The jurors were convinced. On May 3rd, 1991, Robert Peter Russell was convicted of murdering his wife, Shirley Gibbs Russell. Robert Russell was sentenced to life. There is no parole in the federal system. He will never leave prison alive.
Keep driving. Take it easy.
In 1996, a pair of convicted felons escaped across the country. When a foreign military officer disappeared along their trail, authorities wondered if the armed fugitives had become killers. The FBI raced to find the escapees before more victims crossed their path.
In Alabama, 2 desperate criminals fled the custody of a local deputy. Eluding authorities, they made their way across the country in a wave of car theft, abduction, and murder. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Escaped criminals believe they have nothing to lose. They'll do anything to avoid capture. After the convicts claimed their first victim, further bloodshed was inevitable, unless the FBI could find them and bring them to justice.
Central Alabama, May 21st, 1996. A DeKalb County deputy was assigned to transport 3 inmates from state prisons to face court dates. Michael Thompson was to be sentenced for murder.
What it is, I always.
The deputy knew Thompson, having transported him before.
What they putting you back up there for this?
Thompson had persuaded the deputy to let him sit in the front seat. Thompson had just met another inmate, Roger Yaden. The career criminal had 17 burglary convictions and 3 prison escapes on his record. The third inmate was on work release. The prisoners were not handcuffed for the short drive. As the group neared Talladega, Alabama, Thompson made his move. At gunpoint, Thompson forced the deputy to keep driving.
Keep him quiet. Take it easy.
He ordered him to drive to a secluded area in the woods near Lincoln, Alabama.
Open the door. Come up.
Thompson and Yaden freed themselves. They marched their hostages into the woods.
Keep walking, speak cool with it, man. Close off. Go, strip, go.
The men forced the deputy and the other inmate to strip out of their clothes.
Just shut up. The shoes, too.
The deputy's extra handcuff key fell unnoticed to the ground.
Sit down. Sit down. Sit down.
Bound in the remote woods, the officer didn't know if he would be executed.
All right, hurry up. Got the clip. Let's go. It's all right, I'll be riding with you again. Thanks.
The 2 escapees simply ran off.
Have anything to do with us, man?
Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden took off in the direction of Talladega, leaving their prison clothes behind. It was Yaden's 4th escape from Alabama authorities. The deputy had to contact the sheriff's department. With a dropped handcuff key, he freed himself and the other inmate, then ran for help.
Get out.
The escaped convicts had the deputy's service weapon and a shotgun stored in the patrol car. Under the cover of law officers, the 2 felons endangered anyone in their path. The deputy and the remaining inmate had flagged down a motorist and reached the local police department.
Problem is, push my head against the window.
Police immediately issued an urgent be-on-the-lookout alert for the 2 escapees in the stolen patrol car.
One individual, Thompson, 6 foot.
DeKalb County law enforcement launched a search. But the area contained hundreds of miles of rural roads. Despite the search, no sightings of the fugitives or the deputy's car came in that day.
Okay, let's start with the description of the man who had the
It wasn't until the evening that authorities received their first clue to Thompson's and Yaden's actions. A local paramedic contacted Talladega City Police and told them about his ordeal. He said that earlier that day, he was driving near Talladega when he noticed a sheriff's patrol car following him. When he heard the siren, the off-duty paramedic pulled over. He believed it was a routine stop. The officer asked for his license and wallet. Paramedic Bob Gortney didn't think he'd been speeding.
So the reason we pulled you over is your vehicle fits the description of a vehicle that was involved in a hit and run. And I told him, well, I haven't been in any accident. You know, you can check my truck, you can look around, there's not a scratch on it. And he said, well, your truck fits the description that we've gotten, so we're going to, you know, check it out.
Gortney didn't suspect anything.
No flags went off when he first walked up to me because he was in full uniform, had the badge and the name tag, and I really didn't make contact with the whole uniform. I seen the gun when he had his hand on it.
Gortney gave the deputy his paramedic badge number, asking him to call in to verify his identity. But the deputy refused. Following the deputy's orders, the paramedic got into the patrol car. He believed it was simply a misunderstanding and that he would be released shortly.
He said, well, we're going to carry you back over here to the accident scene. And I said, well, that's fine, you know. My truck doesn't fit the description, and we'll just get this cleared up.
He first realized something was wrong when a man in civilian clothes carrying a shotgun ran from the patrol car to his truck.
Okay, let's start with the man first.
From the description, police believe the man driving the pickup was Roger Yaden. They believe Michael Thompson was the one dressed as the deputy. Thompson followed the pickup with the paramedic locked in the back.
What the deal is, you can have the truck.
Gortney asked for an explanation.
Keep it quiet.
He said, we're just going to take your truck. And I knew right then it was a kidnapping. These guys just kidnapped me. So I went into the pleading mode, you know. I told him, I said, look, you know, I'm only 30 years old. I've got a wife and kids, and you have my truck, you have my gun. There's no sense in killing me.
Michael Thompson followed behind to an isolated spot off the highway. Roger Yaden had found the paramedic's 9mm handgun in the truck. Bob Gortney was helpless in the patrol car's locked back seat.
What up? Hi, man.
The men forced him inside the cruiser's trunk. The kidnapped paramedic believed they were going to kill him.
I was laying there at the point, so if they shot through the trunk, I knew they would miss me. You know, if a bullet was to come through, maybe it would graze me and not hit any vital organs, so I was trying to protect myself from the point of being shot through the trunk. And I could hear vehicles pass by, and then I heard my truck crank, and then I heard it sped off, and it was hot. I felt like I was suffocating. I kept thinking to myself, you need to slow down, because if you don't, you're going to use up all your energy, and plus it's hot in here, I'm going to dehydrate, and I'm probably going to pass out. I was scared. I was shaking, and I was laying in the trunk, and I got to thinking, okay, you're a paramedic. You've extricated people 1,000 times. Now it's time for you to do what you've learned to get yourself out of this trunk, to extricate yourself so you can still be alive.
Using a jack he found in the trunk, Gortney worked for 2 hours. Finally, popped the trunk open. He ran to the nearest house where a woman called police.
And she'll just sit there for a minute, enjoy coffee, and try to warm up. I'll be right with you.
An updated bulletin was issued for the pair of fugitives in the black pickup truck they were now driving.
232 to all units. This is a broadcast for 0900 suspect.
They were armed with two 9mm handguns and a shotgun. Authorities sped to the main interstate, figuring the fugitives would use it to flee the area. With a stolen truck full of gas and interstate highways nearby, law officers knew that Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden had a big lead on them. They could be anywhere. 7 days later, and 1,200 miles away, an abandoned black pickup truck with no license plates turned up in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The vehicle identification number on the dash had been destroyed. But police located a second identification number on the truck's chassis. A record search showed that it was the paramedics' truck stolen in Alabama. Because of the interstate travel, the FBI was notified. An immediate search of the area revealed no sign of Michael Thompson or Roger Yaden. The armed fugitives had dumped the one vehicle investigators could trace. On June 7, 1996, the FBI in Birmingham, Alabama, filed a warrant for unlawful flight to avoid confinement. Police agencies across the country were notified to watch for any sign of Yaden and Thompson. 2 weeks later, 1,200 miles east of where the paramedics' stolen truck was recovered in New Mexico, a group of diving students spotted a car at the bottom of Fowler Lake near Terre Haute, Indiana. Indiana Department of Natural Resources agent Dean Jenkins responded with his team.
The car was laying, it was in about 25, 30 foot of water. It was on its top. The windshield had been broke out from when it sank. It apparently was driven off the ramp.
Indiana Department of Natural Resources officers dove into the lake to investigate. They found a red car with no license plates. Divers could see items from the vehicle, including traveler's checks resting on the bottom. There was no body nearby.
The degree of personal items we found and what they were, traveler's checks, those kind of things that would ordinarily you would think would be stolen or discarded along the way prior to someone just dumping a stolen car. I think that was the key thing that made me wonder what else was involved with this vehicle.
Investigators removed the car to process it on shore. In the trunk, technicians recovered a British passport for Army Major David Nichols. Traveler's checks and airline ticket stubs issued to the Major were found in the glove compartment. Among the items was an Alabama jail booking slip with a local Indiana name and address written on the back. Checking the car's identification number, investigators discovered it was a rental from Colorado, reported missing along with the Major 16 days after he had rented it.
The VIN number is 726JJ6.
Because a foreign military officer was the likely victim of a crime, Supervisory Special Agent Jack Osborne from the FBI field office in Indianapolis was called in. He believed the name on the Alabama jail booking slip was the best lead in Major Nichols' disappearance.
From the booking slip that was found in the car, on the back side was several handwritten notes, not so much with phone numbers, but maybe somebody's first name and an address. One of those names and address led us to a relative of Mr. Yaden who resided in Terre Haute.
The relative was an aunt of Roger Yaden's. He was one of 2 escaped convicts whom investigators had searched for in New Mexico. She She told an agent that she did not know why her name was on the back of the Alabama jail booking slip. She also had no knowledge of Major Nichols, his red rental car, or that her nephew had escaped custody.
She told us that she did have a nephew, Roger Dale Yaden, who she believed was in custody in Alabama and had communicated a lot with him in writing as her children had.
She did say that Yaden had some old friends in the area, but she couldn't recall their names. If Roger Yaden had made it to Indiana, the FBI believed murderer Michael Thompson was with him. They knew the pair of escaped convicts had already threatened to kill 3 others in Alabama and were last seen with 2 handguns and a shotgun. Agents feared that Roger Yaden and Michael Thompson may have used one of those weapons on the missing British major. In June of 1996, the FBI and Indiana police searched for armed fugitives Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden, who had escaped from Alabama authorities. They were considered prime suspects in the disappearance of British Army Major David Nichols, whose rental car was found at the bottom of an Indiana lake. According to FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jack Osborne, an Alabama jail booking slip found inside the car linked the fugitives to the missing major.
The evidence certainly associated that vehicle with our missing major, and that he was not in and around Terre Haute, nor was he located in the lake. It likewise then identified our 2 escaped prisoners that we believed were together and did have possession of the British Army officer's car, and that they still possibly could be in the Terre Haute area.
Agents went to the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. to find out more about the major's travel itinerary.
Sent to us prior to his arrival.
The FBI needed to determine where and when Major Nichols may have crossed paths with the armed fugitives.
The British government provided us some very basic information that indicated a British Army officer of theirs had been in the United States, arriving on the 20th of May, arrived at Denver, and was to travel to New Mexico to attend a language school, and then to Texas to attend a second school.
On travel orders issued by NATO, Major David Nichols was scheduled to arrive at the first seminar in Albuquerque on May 26th. Nichols was a vice commander of the British Defense School of Languages, an expert linguist fluent in 5 languages. He told his wife and 3 children that he planned to sightsee for a few days before the seminar. But school officials in Albuquerque never heard from the major after he failed to arrive.
The FBI felt it was strange that the British Army officer had not attended school. The British government likewise, through contact they had with the family and friends of the missing major, felt that it was strange that he had not been in contact with them, which then caused the British government great concern.
Agent Osborne contacted the FBI field office in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Special Agent John Shum needed to determine where the major was last seen in the 450 miles between Denver and Albuquerque.
They gave us his itinerary, photos, descriptions, potential contacts here in the U.S. that he might have contacted once we couldn't find him where he was supposed to be. So they gave us a complete, what we would call a victimology of him, his background, personality.
Agents also checked the British major's credit card purchases.
Hey, how you doing?
The last time he used his card was to buy gas in the small town of Raton on the Colorado-New Mexico border.
Can I take a look at it, please?
The gas station was just 150 miles from the place Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden, the escaped fugitives from Alabama, had abandoned the black pickup truck they had stolen. Agents wanted to confirm how far the British major had traveled past Raton.
Yes, please.
They checked at a hotel in Old Town Albuquerque where the major had made advance reservations. He never showed up, and his reservation was never canceled. The major had disappeared somewhere between the gas station near the Colorado border, where his credit card had been used, and the hotel in Albuquerque. The FBI suspected Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden had abducted him, but they had vanished too. Agent Shum called the major's wife in England to find out more about how her husband may have reacted if accosted by two desperate criminals.
She told me he was a very gentle man, he was a very good man, and that if he was confronted with by these people, that he would not have been confrontational. He would have been willing to do what they say, give them anything they want, just to avoid a confrontation. And she said that he would have been very concerned about his safety and being able to make it back to England to help raise his boys.
1,200 miles away in Indiana, close to the lake where the major's car was found, local police received a call from a junkyard manager who reported seeing two suspicious men on his property. When the officer arrived, the two men fled from a pickup truck loaded with scrap metal. It was unsafe for a lone officer to follow two men into the woods. He called in the truck's license plate numbers and learned the vehicle had been stolen. Crime scene technicians processed the truck. They found a tag from a video camera strap that belonged to Major David Nichols. They also recovered a letter that was addressed to fugitive Roger Yaden's mother in Alabama.
And it was generally saying that he was out of prison and was generally going to be staying in the Terre Haute area.
When agents contacted Yaden's mother in Alabama, she said she hadn't heard from her son and had no idea where he might be.
No, things are going fine.
Investigators were sure the fugitives were nearby.
We've got both your photographs. The items that were recovered in that truck were extremely important because it not only associated Yaden and Thompson with that vehicle, it also associated the missing major with that vehicle.
It was more compelling evidence that Yaden and Thompson were likely responsible for the major's disappearance. But the armed fugitives were moving fast, and the FBI was still one step behind. In the summer of 1996, the FBI continued their hunt for escaped Alabama convicts Michael Thompson and Roger Yaden. Agents suspected they had carjacked a British man who was still missing, then dumped his rental car in a lake near Terre Haute, Indiana, where Roger Yaden had relatives. At a nearby high school, the FBI and Indiana investigators had established a satellite command post. They received a court order to examine Yaden's local juvenile record.
Because we might very well need support.
They noticed that Yaden often got into trouble with one particular friend. Checking the friend's background, they learned that he managed a nearby auto salvage yard. Indianapolis FBI Special Agent William Hamilton would chase the lead.
My partner and I decided that we would drive a unmarked vehicle into this area in an undercover capacity under the ruse of looking for a specific auto part.
The 5-acre property was a good hiding place. It was filled with a maze of cars surrounded by dense woods. Agents staked out the location.
I just haven't seen anything in a while. It's just not moving.
They needed to confirm that Yaden's childhood friend was on duty. In order to assure their identities would not be discovered, They left their badges and weapons in their vehicle.
After going all the way to the far south end of the salvage yard, we noticed a trailer back in the woods, and there was 2 white males there working.
The men fit the general description of the armed fugitives, but the unarmed agents could not be sure.
Hello.
They hoped to learn more from the manager.
You get a lot of stuff in.
The undercover agents engaged him in small talk and confirmed that he was a friend of Roger Yaden's.
The childhood friend, he indicated that he'd known Yaden for several years. They had both came to his residence in early June, and they showed up there in a red Taurus.
That car matched the description of the missing Major's vehicle. By the time the agents finished their conversation, the 2 men they had glimpsed earlier were gone. The FBI believed those 2 men had been Thompson and Yaden. After assembling an arrest team, agents and local officers raced back to the salvage yard. On the way, they noticed a pickup speeding in the opposite direction. One agent spotted Roger Yaden inside, traveling with the salvage yard manager. They couldn't see if Michael Thompson was also with them. Investigators gave chase. They trailed the truck to a dead end. Yaden jumped out and headed for the woods. The fugitive's childhood friend was detained for questioning. He said Yaden had forced him to lead police on a chase until he could jump out of the truck. Assured he had not intentionally harbored the suspects, police later released the friend.
The childhood friend knew nothing of their recent criminal behavior. He had only knew that Yaden had been in jail once for burglary.
Roger Yaden had eluded pursuing investigators. A canine unit was called in to track him. The highly trained dog picked up a scent.
Mike. Mike. Mike.
On July 2nd, 1996, Roger Yaden decided he was finished running. But his accomplice, convicted murderer Michael Thompson, was still at large. Having Yaden in custody was only a partial victory, according to FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne.
After Yaden's arrest, this is not over at all. We know that we're now dealing with another fugitive, maybe the worst of the 2 fugitives. We do not know where he's at. If he's still on the property, if he's in the trailer, if he's in the woods, if he has a weapon or not.
Come out with your hands up.
Suspecting Michael Thompson took refuge in the auto salvage yard's trailer. Law enforcement teams surrounded it.
Thompson, this is Special Agent Hamilton with the FBI. You are surrounded. I repeat, with the FBI.
They ordered him to come out unarmed.
You are surrounded. This is a warning.
Agents warned anyone inside that the trailer would be tear gassed.
Your hands up. Again, I repeat, we are going to fire tear gas.
There was no response.
With your hands up.
The atmosphere was very tense. We did not know if Thompson was inside the trailer with maybe a long gun or even a handgun, positioned on some of our people. So we had to maintain cover all around the perimeter of the trailer.
Come out with your hands up. You will not be harmed.
Authorities gave the signal to use the gas. They stormed the trailer. No one knew if escaped murderer Michael Thompson was armed and barricaded inside.
Thompson. I repeat, Mr. Thompson, you need to come out.
On
with your
July
hands
2nd,
up.
1996,
You are
after
subject to
capturing
fear
Alabama
death.
fugitive Roger Yaden in Indiana, FBI agents stormed a salvage yard trailer where they believed his partner was hiding. But Indiana Department of Natural Resources agent Dean Jenkins and his team did not find convicted killer Michael Thompson inside.
That was a terrible disappointment because we figured we were on to him. We caught one, we were looking to get the other one and pretty much make it a clean sweep, and he wasn't in there.
Agents questioned the salvage yard manager, a childhood friend of Yaden's who had unknowingly harbored the fugitives. He said he had no idea where Thompson might be hiding, but he did show agents where Yaden and Thompson kept their belongings. From the trunk of a car, agents retrieved a suitcase labeled with the name of missing British Major David Nichols. The Major's clothes and personal effects were still inside. Agents believed the fugitives had carjacked the Major in New Mexico. The search team secured a 3-mile perimeter around the salvage yard and told the man to call immediately if he spotted Thompson.
We used canines and broke up into teams of 3 and 4 officers with canines and searched the area, ran tracks all throughout the lot, the salvage yard area, and then the surrounding woods looking for him, and that took an awfully long time. That went from the time they inserted the gas in the afternoon well past darkness.
With a convicted killer on the loose, FBI and local law enforcement could not afford to wait. They patrolled roadways and fields, hoping to flush Thompson from hiding. Despite hours of searching, the fugitive had eluded them once again.
Yeah, the smoke all came in this way, so.
Markings on the outside.
In the morning, agents considered the possibility that Thompson may have somehow slipped past the perimeter. They had no way of knowing if he was still in the immediate area.
Miss Hamilton.
Then Special Agent William Hamilton got the call they were hoping for.
All right, good. Listen, don't go near him. We're going to be there.
On July the 3rd, the morning following the arrest of Roger Yaden, the childhood friend of Yaden telephoned me and advised me that the subject, Thompson, was asleep in the junkyard in the back of one of the cars near his residence, the trailer.
The team was concerned that Thompson would be armed. There was no telling what the desperate fugitive would do when cornered. Exhausted from running, the killer gave up without a fight.
Hands up, hands up.
After 43 days, 6,000 miles, and thousands of man-hours, the last fugitive wanted in Major Nichols' disappearance was in custody. Thompson refused to talk to investigators. But Roger Yaden, apprehended the day before, felt differently. Hoping for leniency from federal authorities, Yaden agreed to tell investigators what they wanted to know.
We also need a new car. We need to ditch the pickup.
FBI Special Agent Jack Osborne led the questioning.
We had about $200. Yes. All right. We only have one.
He indicated a willingness to give us a statement, to provide all of the information that he and Thompson were involved in, to include the initial escape, to include the carjacking in Alabama. And this is the first time that we learned that the British Army officer had been killed.
In the black pickup the pair had carjacked from Alabama, the fugitives made their way to New Mexico, selling tools from the truck for money. When their cash ran out, they decided to rob and carjack another victim. They staked out a remote rest area 100 miles south of Raton, New Mexico, the last known town where British Major Nichols had traveled. The convicts figured that tourists would be traveling with a lot of money and waited for someone who was traveling alone. That's when the British Major pulled up. As they had done in Alabama, they forced their victim into the trunk of the car. Thompson drove the Major's rental car, while Yaden followed in the truck. From Yaden's account, the British Major reacted to the crime as the Major's wife had predicted he would, according to Special Agent John Shum.
Everything she said about him is exactly what Yaden told us happened, that Major Nichols was non-confrontational. He did what he could to keep the situation from escalating. He talked about his 3 boys in England, about how he needed to get back there for them, and he asked that he not be hurt because he was concerned about what would happen to his children.
Nothing to do with it. I was in the pickup truck. I was in the back.
Yaden said Thompson had planned the whole thing and that he was calling the shots. They drove 50 miles until it was dark, then pulled into a deserted area off the highway. At gunpoint, Thompson forced Major Nichols out of the trunk. Without warning, he shot him in the back of the head. Thompson turned the Major over and shot again. They hid his body at the site, then abandoned the pickup truck several miles away. Yaden said Thompson never explained why he had killed this carjacking victim.
You didn't have to kill him.
The pair of fugitives drove Major Nichols' car to Indiana, where they dumped it in Fowler Lake.
Tell us about the gun.
Roger Yaden had confessed his crimes to the FBI, but he wanted a deal before he gave up the location of Major Nichols' body.
He wanted to hold back until he could get some assurance from the government that we would not seek the death penalty against him. If that occurred, then he was willing to help us find the body of the missing Major if we had not located the body already.
All right, so let's talk about this deal. What are you looking for here?
Agents met with Yaden and his lawyer. The prisoner said he would tell them where the body was if they also promised he would not serve time in an Alabama state prison.
You want the federal. What's going on?
We need to know.
Initial searches without his help turned up nothing. FBI Special Agent John Shum was worried the Major's body would not be found without Yaden's help.
I don't follow this. What is the deal?
The most important thing for us to do was find Major Nichols' body. That was going to be important to be successful in any prosecution, and it was important for us because it was the right thing to do. Since we couldn't make him safe in this country, since we couldn't guarantee his safety, at least we could return his body to his family.
So, what are we going to get out of this? You think you're asking for a federal facility?
Federal prosecutors agreed to the deal.
It's all written out.
What are you looking at?
Yaden led investigators to a secluded spot in the New Mexico wilderness. The prisoner was an accomplished escape artist, having fled custody more than once.
Well, we were very concerned about that because he had escaped 4 times before in Alabama. He was obviously very good at that. Plus, we had to be concerned about our own safety. So not only did we focus on the mission of finding Major Nichols' body, but we had to be very, very concerned about making sure Roger Yaden was not trying to deceive us and just using this as a ruse to set up an escape attempt.
FBI field agents were wary as a SWAT team secured the location. They had no way of knowing if Yaden might have friends in the area waiting to strike at agents. On September 24th, 1996, recaptured prisoner Roger Yaden led the FBI into the New Mexico desert, where he claimed the body of Major David Nichols remained hidden after being murdered. Yaden would be spared the death penalty if he could locate the remains. FBI Special Agent John Shum recalls that the likelihood of finding the body without Yaden's help was slim.
It was a very desolate area. It was off of a very little used 2-lane highway in New Mexico in a very remote area. And then off this 2-lane highway, we had to go down a gravel road for approximately a mile. And then off the gravel road, we had to drive into a cattle pasture for several hundred yards. So it was incredibly remote.
Agents were concerned that Yaden had taken them there as a ruse to effect another escape. Finally, Yaden pointed out a spot to the agents.
There it is. And even Yaden himself seemed very somber and respectful of the situation we were in, that we had finally located this man's body and we're going to be able to give him a proper resting place now.
Didn't you say something about
exposure to the elements made identification impossible. Examiners took dental x-rays, which were later matched to records sent from England.
Right.
Major Nichols' family in Britain was notified. The officer's murderer, Michael Thompson, avoided a possible death sentence by pleading guilty in federal court to carjacking and murdering a foreign official. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. For kidnapping, robbery, and escape in Alabama, Thompson received 5 additional life sentences. In exchange for his cooperation, Roger Yaden was allowed to plead guilty to only 1 count of carjacking and was sentenced to 18 years. Yaden was afraid of Alabama state prisons. As part of his deal, he was to serve his sentence in a federal facility.
Yaden, time to get up.
He was temporarily held at a county jail in Las Vegas, New Mexico, until he could be transferred.
Yaden, let's go. Yaden, get up. Come on, get up.
Remarkably, Roger Yaden had escaped again. 2 other inmates also made the breakout with Yaden. The search party with a dog team tracked Yaden's scent from jail. But the trail ended at an interstate highway. Later that day, authorities captured one of 2 other inmates who escaped with Yaden.
Go ahead.
The inmate had injured his leg in the attempt and was unable to get far on foot. He explained to authorities how they got out. He said that Yaden had designed the plan. In the jail's black market, he bartered for an Allen wrench and a hacksaw. Yaden unlocked maintenance panels to gain access to air ducts that led to the roof. He cut through ductwork, then the roof to get outside. A fourth man stayed behind to replace the panel. The escapees moved along the roof of the jail, then jumped over the wall. Once on the outside, the inmates said they split up. That was the last time he saw Yaden. Prison officials called FBI Special Agent John Shum to give him the bad news.
Once I heard Yaden escaped yet again from federal custody, my first reaction was I was very angry, because here was a guy that had a history of having escaped numerous times in the past. The people that were responsible for his custody knew his history, and they should have been more careful.
Investigators believed Yaden would likely head toward family and friends in DeKalb County, Alabama.
Have you seen Roger lately?
No, he's been
Agents
together
interviewed
for
anyone
months.
Yaden might have contacted in the area, including an ex-girlfriend.
Have you talked to him on the phone? Letter?
No letters.
Like the others, she said she hadn't seen or heard from him. They left a card and told her to call if Yaden surfaced.
Think of anything, call him?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you that.
After the agents left, she admitted to her current boyfriend that she had let Yaden hide in her house.
It was an accident.
He was upstairs in the attic.
I guess he's your guy, but he's gotten himself into a lot of trouble.
The boyfriend was upset and called police. Nearby officers responded. They didn't know if Yaden was armed and waiting for them. Five weeks after his escape from New Mexico, officers finally cornered Roger Yaden. Captured in DeKalb County, Alabama, Roger Yaden's crime spree ended where it began. His escape nullified the deal with federal prosecutors.
Check this area.
He was charged with the crimes he had committed during his last escape from Alabama. Alabama Assistant Attorney General David Estes prosecuted Yaden in Talladega.
The jury in this case deliberated for a very short period of time, an hour at the most, and they came back and they convicted Roger Dale Yaden of 3 counts of kidnapping in the first degree, 2 counts of robbery in the first degree, and 1 count of escape in the first degree.
Yaden received 5 concurrent life sentences without parole. Now in maximum lockdown, Roger Yaden will never leave Alabama prison alive.